Hi, my name is Greg Riberick, and welcome to the Q-Line Lectures, a new monthly series of long-form videos attempting to take a more in-depth and thoughtful look at the theme park industry. I want this series to be a discussion of all the techniques ride designers employ to immerse the guests in an experience they'll remember for years to come. In many cases, these rides have become entrenched in the popular zeitgeist, and yet I haven't really found any examples of people digging into the meat of what makes this medium so special and important to millions of people. I thought for this inaugural episode we'd start by taking a look at Splash Mountain, and specifically the way it employs the 3-act structure to create a ride that feels like a complete experience and an actual story rather than a series of disconnected vignettes. Listen to any interview with an Imagineer and they'll be sure to bring up storytelling. It's almost lost its meaning and become a complete piece of branding, meant to ensure that Disney and storytelling become completely synonymous concepts. I'm reminded of a 2014 video talking about the creation of Disney Springs, where Theron Skies, the executive creative director at Imagineering, says that, quote, Disney Springs was not only about bringing diversity of retail, destination dining, and elaboration on fantastic entertainment, but it was really about bringing story to this venue. So we started that by creating a historic timeline. We started to say, when did these certain events happen? And once we had that kind of backbone, we could build everything on that. Architecture, music, costuming, landscaping, everything could apply to the historic timeline we built. The problem is that what he's describing isn't story at all, it's theming. You could build an incredibly detailed world with all the backstory and lore you want, but at the end of the day, this only really encompasses the setting for a story. In essence, what Theron Skies is talking about is creating a well-realized frame for a painting that is noticeably absent in the center. So if story is that painting, how do we want to define it? Well, simplified and boiled down to a pre-writing 101 level, stories create characters who want things, and then play out as those characters struggle against obstacles to obtain the things they wanted. This journey for the character can be graphed with time on the x-axis, and on the y, the rising and falling emotional stakes for the protagonist. This loosely defined graph represents the overall shape of our narrative, or the story structure. The most common structure in modern storytelling looks like this, and is generally broken up into 3 chunks or acts. This 3-act structure has been used and reused since the origins of storytelling itself, and while that may make it sound like a lazy shortcut, it remains important as the bedrock of how to tell a compelling story, from ancient Greece to Star Wars to The Simpsons movie. Act 1 is all about establishing who the protagonist is, the world they live in, what they want, and what potential obstacles stand in their way. It leads up to an inciting incident where the protagonist must leave relative safety and begin their journey. Act 2 places the protagonist in increasing conflict with their obstacles until they reach their lowest emotional point and are furthest from achieving their goal. Act 3 hits the climax of all that and follows it to its logical conclusion, with our character either achieving their goals or not. So with that out of the way, let's start applying that 3-act structure to Splash Mountain. Act 1 is usually where theme park rides struggle least. After all, immersing riders in a new world is precisely what they do best. Despite this, the exact structure of what Act 1 includes can vary wildly from ride to ride. Some, like the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man or Indiana Jones Adventure, basically use their queue as a replacement for the majority of Act 1, letting the rider jump right into the conflict when they board the vehicle. Splash Mountain uses its queue as part of the first act without supplanting it entirely. As you wind your way through the farmhouse and tunnels of the Briar Patch, you ease yourself away from the crowds of the park and into Disney's idealized and pasteurized version of the Reconstruction South. The music alone, with its listful harmonicas and plunky banjos, does a lot to transport guests, but noticeably, the queue doesn't fully introduce any of the characters or plot points featured on the ride, which really helps reinforce the overall leisurely tone and pacing of the experience. Compare this queue approach to a ride like Transformers, with its flashing alarms and exposition-shouting characters, to see how big an impact a queue design can have on affecting the pacing of a ride experience. Boarding our logs, Splash Mountain stays consistent to its pacing goals. The first noticeable moment comes here, a full 45 seconds into the ride, when you watch another boat going down the big drop. On an in-the-world narrative level, this early glimpse of the thorny Briar Patch sets it up to come back later without feeling cheap or unexplained. On another meta level, this helps establish stakes for the riders themselves, with a threatening reminder that, hey, you're gonna have to go down that later. The two purposes of this moment is not only great design, but it also highlights the divide on Splash Mountain between the rider and the characters. Since the ride never addresses us or who we are directly, the riders don't quite exist in this world and straddle the line between observers and participants. But that's the topic for another video. Another lift hill and winding turn later, we finally plunge down to the show building itself, and Act 1 begins in earnest, a remarkable 3 minutes into the ride. This amount of preamble and world building is kind of unprecedented, and admittedly only possible with this cheap log flume ride system. Inside, the beats start hitting fast as this first scene gets much of the heavy lifting out of the way. We meet Brer Rabbit and get his goal, finding an exciting adventure by leaving his home for good. We also meet our main obstacles, Brer Fox and Brer Bear, with their own motivation, to capture and eat Brer Rabbit. This is reinforced over the next few scenes, as the other rabbits remark how Fox and Bear are always chasing Brer Rabbit. And then as Bear triggers the rope trap meant to catch Brer Rabbit, who now sets off to his laughing place. So reaching this end of Act 1, we've established our world, our characters, our central conflict, which is now escalating as we enter Act 2. The transition to Act 2 is always a moment where the story turns and really kicks into gear, and in many theme park rides is all too often marked by a plot beat, where a character shouts, "Oh no, something's gone wrong." Again, maybe a topic best saved for another video. The peaceful world set up in Act 2 is disturbed by the rising conflict between the protagonist and their obstacles. This transition from Act 1 to Act 2 in Splash Mountain is marked by the change of tone from the jovial first scenes to the slightly more dark, threatening, and off-kilter laughing place. The first scene has Brer Rabbit laughing at the bees attacking Bear, but Fox is right behind him, ready to capture his prey. We meander through the laughing place for a while, as the ominous cackling keeps riders uncomfortable, in contrast to the relative comfort and safety of those early scenes. Finally, we meet Brer Rabbit again, captured in the beehive by Fox. At this point, Brer Rabbit is in his darkest moment, and is furthest from achieving his goal of having a fun adventure away from home. These are the obvious signs that we've reached the end of Act 2, and are moving into Act 3. This is actually the point where most theme park rides start to fall apart, and Splash Mountain pulls through in major ways. As we reach the top of the lift hill, we've hit the full climax, both for the characters and us the riders. It's fitting that this highest physical point of the ride also coincides with the top of our graph, because this is where stakes are at their peak, and danger is most imminent. As we peer over the edge, Brer Rabbit tricks Fox and Bear into throwing him down at the briar patch, where he can actually survive just fine despite what they might think. This climax works because 1. The idea of the briar patch was set up when we passed it by all that time ago, and 2. There's a logical reason that Brer Rabbit survives the big fall, rather than just because the plot demands it. Even more important than that big climax, however, is all the scenes that follow. After splashing down, we make a big U-turn outside, which gives guests time to talk amongst themselves about who got the most wet. This gives the ride yet another interesting social component that'd be another good topic for a different video. Heading back inside, we reach the final scenes, where we see all the animals on the riverboat, here to celebrate Brer Rabbit returning home safely. Fox and Bear have had their plans foiled and are stuck in the thorns, and Brer Rabbit decides home is the place he wanted to be all along. These scenes fill the important role of closing all the questions posed by the scenes all the way back in Act 1, so the rider is left feeling like they got a full experience of a story progressing all the way from start to logical finish. Looking back over our graph now, I hope it's really clear how you can take all the basic plot beats from Splash Mountain and apply them right back to the 3-act structure. That might seem like an incredibly low bar for storytelling, but you'd be surprised how often rides try and fail to reach this mark. Let's quickly compare this side by side with the graph for a very similar ride, the Jurassic Park River Adventure. Act 1 has guests boarding their boats and entering Jurassic Park, seeing peaceful and playful dinosaurs, and then entering Act 2 as bum bum bum, something's gone wrong and we're diverted to enter the dangerous raptor containment area. Act 2 builds as we see how the raptors have escaped and taken over the park, and tension escalates as we climb up the huge dinosaur-infested structure. Act 3 starts as we catch a glimpse of the horrifying T-Rex in the distance, threatening to eat us up, and then, well, nothing. We escape the T-Rex by falling through a hidden track beneath him for no reason, and then head right back to the unload station. There's no resolution to the raptors breaking out of containment, no completion of the 3-act structure, and that emptiness is felt as the story ends up feeling like a total afterthought rather than well integrated into the story itself. This isn't to say that the story of Splash Mountain is a perfect ideal to be strived for, because it's not, and it has a lot of its own problems. Looking past its well-defined structure, we see that the characters and plot beats are very simplistic. This isn't really a story with thought-provoking twists or interesting characters, it's merely a fable, and a problematically conservative one at that. The end message that Brer Rabbit was always happiest at home and should have never left runs shockingly contrary to the typical message we try and inspire in children, that expanding your horizons and gaining new experiences is always for the best, even if putting yourself out in new situations can initially be scary. It also isn't to say that every ride must strictly adhere to the 3-act structure if it hopes to tell a complete story, because there's many other possible structures and techniques that ride designers can use to fully engage their captive audience. I hope, however, that examining the 3-act structure and Splash Mountain helps give some insight into what I want to do with this channel. Show the many different ways in which ride creators can craft an experience that will stick with you long after you've exited the gift shop. Thanks for watching.